When I moved into Willowbrook Estates, I thought I had found my perfect suburban paradise. The neighborhood was pristine, the lawns were manicured to perfection, and the HOA president, Karen Pemberton, seemed friendly enough during my initial tour. Little did I know that beneath her perfectly styled blonde bob and designer blazer lurked the soul of a petty tyrant. My first few months were blissfully quiet. I settled into my corner lot, appreciated the extra space in my backyard, and began planning some modest improvements. That's when I decided to install a small storage shed. Nothing fancy, just a standard 8 by 10 foot structure to store my gardening tools and seasonal decorations. I carefully reviewed the HOA guidelines, measured the required setbacks, and even chose a color that matched my house perfectly. 3 days after the shed was delivered and assembled, Karen appeared at my front door with a clipboard and a scowl that could curdle milk. "Good morning, I'm here about your illegal structure," she announced without preamble. I invited her in for coffee, thinking there must be some misunderstanding we could clear up like reasonable adults. "Your shed violates Section 12.4 of the HOA covenants," she declared, pulling out a thick binder of rules. According to Karen, the shed was 3 inches too close to my property line. 3 inches. I showed her my measurements, my calculations, even offered to have a professional surveyor verify the placement. But Karen had already made up her mind. "Rules are rules," she said with the smugness of someone who had never been challenged in their life. "The shed needs to be removed immediately, or you'll face fines." I spent the next week researching every angle. I hired that professional surveyor, who confirmed my shed was actually 4 inches within compliance. I presented this evidence to Karen with certified documentation. She dismissed it with a wave of her manicured hand. "The HOA board has voted," she lied, because I later discovered she never consulted anyone else. "Remove it by Friday or face escalating penalties." That's when I realized Karen wasn't interested in compliance or community standards. She simply couldn't tolerate that someone in her domain had done something without her explicit approval. This was about power, pure and simple, and Karen intended to flex hers. The fine started at $50. When I refused to pay for something I hadn't violated, they doubled each week. Karen began driving past my house daily, sometimes stopping to take photos of my shed like she was documenting evidence of some great crime. She started issuing additional violations for increasingly ridiculous infractions. My mailbox was supposedly 2 degrees off perpendicular. My garbage cans were visible from the street for 27 minutes after pickup. She even claimed my doormat was an unauthorized decorative element. I tried reasoning with other neighbors, hoping to find allies or at least neutral voices. What I discovered was that Karen had been terrorizing the entire community for years. Mrs. Henderson whispered about how Karen had forced her to repaint her shutters 3 times to achieve the exact approved shade of colonial blue. The Johnsons told me Karen had threatened legal action because their dog barked twice during quiet hours. Everyone lived in fear of her arbitrary interpretations and vindictive enforcement. But I also learned something else during these conversations. As a senior partner at one of the state's most prestigious law firms, I had connections and resources that my neighbors lacked. More importantly, my late father had been a real estate developer who taught me that every property transaction tells a story, and every story has leverage points if you know where to look. I spent my weekend at the county courthouse, diving into public records. What I found was fascinating. Karen's house sat on Lot 17, a standard quarter-acre parcel. But her oversized 3-car garage extended onto what should have been a utility easement. The original developer had granted this easement to the county for future infrastructure needs, but somehow Karen's garage had been built right through it. Either through sloppy construction oversight or deliberate ignorance, her precious garage was technically on public property. Even more interesting was the easement's specific language. It granted the county rights not just for utilities, but for any public infrastructure deemed necessary for community welfare. The easement was perpetual and irrevocable, meaning even if Karen wanted to negotiate, she had no legal standing to object to its use. I made some phone calls. One advantage of representing major construction companies is that you develop relationships with people who understand how bureaucracy really works. My friend David worked in the county's transportation planning department. Over lunch, I casually mentioned the unused easement in Willowbrook Estates and suggested it might be perfect for a community project the county had been discussing. "We've been looking for a location for a new recycling center," David mused. "Something close to residential areas to encourage participation, but with enough space for trucks to maneuver safely." I nodded thoughtfully. That easement would provide excellent access from the main road. Very convenient for residents to drop off their recyclables. The beauty of bureaucracy is that once an idea enters the system and gets stamped with the right approvals, it develops momentum that's nearly impossible to stop. The county's recycling program had been mandated by state environmental regulations, but delayed by the lack of suitable locations. An available easement in a well-established neighborhood solved multiple problems simultaneously. Within 2 weeks, official notices appeared in mailboxes throughout Willowbrook Estates. The county was exercising its rights to the utility easement on Oak Street for the construction of a neighborhood recycling facility. Construction would begin in 30 days, with completion expected within 6 months. Karen stormed into my backyard while I was watering my perfectly legal sheds surrounding flower beds. Her face was the color of overripe tomatoes, and she was clutching the county notice like it was a declaration of war. "This is your doing," she shrieked. "You're behind us somehow." I looked up from my watering with the serene expression of someone who had absolutely nothing to hide. "I'm sorry, Karen, but I don't understand. Are you referring to the county's recycling program? I think it's wonderful that they're making it more convenient for residents to participate in environmental conservation." "They want to tear down my garage," she sputtered. 20 years I've lived here, and now they say it's in their way." I made appropriate sympathetic noises while internally celebrating. The county's plans were actually quite reasonable. The recycling center would be a small, attractive facility with screened bins and regular pickup schedules. But Karen's garage sat directly in the path of the required access road. According to the engineering surveys, removing her garage was the only feasible option for truck access. "Surely you can appeal the decision," I suggested helpfully. After all, rules are rules. The irony was apparently lost on her. Karen spent the next 3 weeks launching a furious campaign against the recycling center. She organized protests, attended city council meetings, and even hired a lawyer to challenge the county's easement rights. Every argument she made was systematically dismantled by the county's legal team, who had researched the easement thoroughly and knew their position was unassailable. I watched from my backyard, tending to my perfectly legal shed, as Karen's garage was professionally demolished. The county had even arranged for her to salvage any belongings, though Karen was too proud to accept their assistance gracefully. She stood on her front lawn, arms crossed, glaring at the demolition crew like she could stop them through sheer force of will. The recycling center that replaced Karen's garage was actually quite attractive. The county had used brick and landscaping that complemented the neighborhood's aesthetic. It was open only during reasonable hours, well-maintained, and genuinely useful for residents. Even Karen's immediate neighbors admitted it was better than they had expected. But the real masterpiece was what happened to Karen's property value and her precious control. Without her garage, she had no covered parking for her pristine luxury sedan. Her property lost significant value due to the adjacent commercial use facility. Most importantly, as HOA president, she now had to live next door to a facility that generated regular truck traffic, occasional noise, and a constant reminder that there were forces in the world more powerful than her petty authority. 2 months later, I was enjoying my morning coffee on my back deck when I noticed Karen standing in her driveway, staring at the recycling center where her garage used to be. A county truck was making its weekly pickup, backing expertly through the space that had once housed her car. The driver waved cheerfully at Karen, apparently oblivious to her murderous expression. That's when I saw it happen. The exact moment when Karen realized the full scope of what had occurred. Her eyes widened as she turned to look at my shed, still standing proudly in my backyard, still perfectly legal, still completely within compliance. Then her gaze moved to the recycling center, the permanent reminder that her petty tyranny had consequences she never imagined. Her mouth fell open as the pieces finally clicked together. The shed she couldn't eliminate. The easement she never knew existed. The county project that solved everyone's problems except hers. The complete and utter checkmate delivered through nothing more than public records, legitimate bureaucratic processes, and her own overreach.